Everybody, welcome back to the Insiders Lounge. Today we have another episode with another special guest. Mads, thanks for coming on, and feel free to introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm Mads Davidsen from Denmark. That's my introduction.
Perfect. We'll get into the rest of what you do and what your life kind of evolves around right now. But firstly, let's start with the early days growing up, potentially playing football. Did you play football growing up? And what was your early life like?
Yes, I grew up in a small village, North Zealand in Denmark, north of Copenhagen. And in those years, in the 80s, there was not so many possibilities, to be honest, that we didn't have computers or mobile phones. And it was not an area where maybe there was so many things to do. So there was a huge stadium with 4 or 5 size pitches that were just open. So of course, as a kid, that's where you ended up playing. If you didn't train with the team, then you played there before the training, and you played there after school. You went there in the weekends. So yeah, football was a big part of my life growing up.
And then getting into your playing career, did you have much of a playing career? If so, let's get into a little bit of the details, and then we'll work into how you transitioned into the business side, I guess you could call it, of football.
Yeah, no, the playing career we can end quite quickly because it ended first of all quite quickly, and secondly, with the knowledge I have now, I obviously saw that I played too long in a small club before I then tried to move to a bigger club, and then I found out that the gap was too big. It's the same we of course see today, that if a player doesn't join us at whatever 10, 11 years old, they come at 14, 15, it's basically too late to catch up with the amount of hours, with the intensity, with the quality. So I ended up came to as a 19-year-old to a third tier club, Helsingør in Denmark, and that was my so-called prime. But I had a lot of injuries as well, and there was not an excuse, but it was actually an explanation why I decided to quit young, because I obviously liked to play. I loved the game. But then I was too frustrated of constantly being rehabbed. And then I decided to leave football as very young and went to university. And then I was kind of pulled back. And I think that goes a little bit into something we can also discuss, that you sometimes meet people randomly that end up being your pathway or a big part of your pathway. So I was very lucky that my coach in Helsingør was Flemming Petersen, who I actually work very closely with today. He's the group technical director in Right to Dream. So I've known Flemming for more than 20 years, and he was kind of my pathway into football. Flemming can be brutally honest, but he always mean it in a good way. And what he was saying to me is that he said it in a nice way. He said, "You have a much bigger potential as a coach than a player." Then that's a nice way of saying that you're not very good. But
Yeah.
luckily, he also meant what he said, that he saw potential in me as a coach, because I was probably a player that was curious. I was often thinking about the exercises. I was thinking about, why are we doing as we're doing? What was the purpose of this drill? Asking for, could I see some videos? This was in the DVD days, so a long time ago. But getting an Ajax DVD, for example, and watching it at home to study kind of the movement. This I was already interested in as a player, and I think that's why Flemming kind of pushed me a little bit in towards coaching, and so that's one of those pillars that you meet in your life, and that actually can have a quite defining issue with your direction in life.
Yeah, I was going to ask what was the main transition, because every player that kind of ends up working in the business aspect or the coaching or whatever it is in football normally has, whether it's a person or an experience or something that transitions them into their next phase. And
Yeah,
so that next phase for you was coaching.
yeah. Flemming Petersen was definitely the key person in that transition, and also all the last 20 years constantly used him. In the beginning, almost like a mentor or advisor. When I had an issue or I had a decision to make in my career, I called him to get his take. But later on, more for friendship, and now a colleague, and a very top human being that I really enjoy to have in my life, and of course as well to work with. But then I would say a little bit step later, I was also privileged to meet a guy called Leif Mikkelsen, who's actually a handball coach originally. He's
Mm.
used to coach the Danish national team in handball. But Leif, he set up, he was quite proactive in the 2000 to set up in Copenhagen a group of, he called it performance areas, where we met across different industries. So, for example, one was music or art, another one was sports, where obviously I represented football. Someone could be in the school and educational pathway, some could be from the business side. So he gathered a lot of people with a lot of interest in talent development, talent ID, talent management, etc. And I have to say, I came there as a very young and inexperienced coach, and it was a big eye opener for me to listen to what they were doing, working with talent on the Royal Ballet, for example, or what they were doing with talent management in a bank in Copenhagen. It really opened my
Mm.
eyes for how much there was out there to learn, and it made me rather curious. So that kind of meeting and that kind of um working group, which we were kind of a inspirational working group, was really also defining my key interest in moving into becoming a really professional coach, where someone also actually paid you to do it, not just volunteering. So that's probably the two key moments.
Yeah, so you had those two key figures that helped propel your career. Working through your career now, you ended up going to China for quite a few years. Can you speak on kind of, that's a crazy transition from Denmark to China. How did that opportunity come up, and what was your experience like while you were over there?
Yeah, it was. You're right. It's definitely not something you can plan for, but I would say it was deliberate, planned, not China, but to go abroad.
Hmm.
Because I decided when I was very young coach that I wanted to go abroad to challenge myself on a personal level, but also of course on a football knowledge level to experience other leagues, to experience other football cultures. So I kind of set myself up for it. So for example, I didn't. It sounds like I choose not to. I'm not saying that, but I choose not to marry, for example. I'm not
Hmm.
saying I had the opportunity. I'm just saying that I choose kind of a. I'm in two suitcases in my rented apartment, and I can basically move tomorrow. Kind of
Hmm.
um, set up. I deliberately expressed my ambition, which in Denmark sometimes can be seen as wrong. We have something called janteloven, which is a cultural thing that you cannot read about, but it's in the culture that we don't like people that say something quite
Hmm.
ambitious. We want to be equal. We are a very equal society, and then nobody should be above anyone else. So I set that deliberately to express my ambition, first of all, but also for the people around me to hear this and acknowledge this. So one person I said it to was the former Danish international Davidsen, who then 2 years later called me and said, I'm opening a football academy in Shanghai, China, and I want you to lead it. I know you mentioned to me you want to go abroad, so here's your opportunity. So that in some way you can say that I have no clue that Ebbe was going to open China. I had no clue that China would be my first option, but I knew that I wanted to get out, and I kind of tried to make a pathway for it deliberately. So that was the step into China, and then as you know, when you are out, you develop your network. You're constantly meeting new people, and after 1 year, 1.5 year with building up the private academy with Ebbe, I felt that it was time like to move back into the club. I missed the club feeling. There was a very different role to build a football academy from scratch. I was almost like a managing director as well, kind of also doing the budgets and hiring the coaches and so on, which was of course very big learning for me. But I also missed maybe still the coaching part a lot. Even I was doing some coaching. So luckily, I developed a good network already in China, and I was doing some analysis on Chinese TV. So I had some, let's say, some branding as well through that. And then I had a chance to go into to a club in the south of China, Guangzhou RNF, later on called Guangzhou FC, where I came in with the Swedish coach Sven Goran Eriksson as part of his coaching team, and then I was doing the recruitment on the side of that as well. And then we performed. As you know, in football, you perform, then you have new opportunities, and then we were recruited, headhunted to a job in a newly founded club in Shanghai. And then I ended up being everything from head of recruitment to assistant coach to the 23 head coach to then becoming the technical director, and ended up staying more than 4 years at that club. So totally that meant almost 7 years in China, and of course a big part of my adult life is spent there.
And you mentioned Fleming told you when you were younger that you would have more potential as a coach than you ever did as a player, and you ended up working up to a UEFA Pro license. What was the licensing kind of experience like, and how was it once you finally made it to that pro level? Not only on the license front, but also on the pro front in terms of football, working with the clubs in China and many other places around the world.
The license, of course, is difficult to enter also because I'm a no name in the industry, so I fight against people that maybe played 60 national team games, and I'm not envying that. It's just a fact that I'm behind the queue, and I'm fine with that. Then I just work my way up from there. But that's just a fact that I was actually, as I remember it, rejected twice, I think, for the course before I then came. And sometimes you need to sacrifice to really reach out for something. So I was actually working in Guangzhou during my pro license, where you physically have to attend, and it's only a 2-day attend, so it's basically less than 48 hours. So I flew 16 hours back from China to Copenhagen to attend 1.5 day. Literally, it's 1.5 day because you sleep there one time and then you finish at 4 p.m. the second day, so people can get home. And then I had to fly 16 hours again to China. So it was a tough 1.5 year, but I was clear in my mind. I knew I needed the license. You know, it's difficult to, no matter what we think about the license, you needed to take certain jobs, of course, from regulations, but also it gives you a stamp of some kind of quality around the world when people see UEFA Pro license. So I knew that it was just something I had to do, and of course it's also interesting to learn. You learn a lot from the people there. We are in Denmark. We are 20 on a course, and it's funny to look back at it today. It's so many years ago, but I think 5 or 6 of them now are top coaches at the highest level, and of course Flemming Pedersen was actually also in the course. Funny enough. But it's a really strong environment where you learn a lot from each other if you manage to challenge each other, and then you move on from there.
And you mentioned a little earlier, you played, you had all these many different roles in football. You're a player, head of recruitment, assistant coach, and then you ended up working as an academy director. And then later on, you were a sporting director at Al Jazeera, I believe it was the sports club there. That's another completely different region. I guess it's still technically in Asia, but also another side of the world, completely different to China and Denmark. What was the transition like there? How did you find that opportunity? And what, I'm sure that must have been also very different to your other experiences you had previously.
Yeah, it's there's two answers to why I choose to go there. One was back in 2008. I was actually offered a job at Aspire Academy in Qatar, and I did everything. I let go of my apartment. I paused my university degree. I resigned from my coaching job at the time, in a youth coaching job. And then what happened was that for a number of political reasons, I didn't get my visa approved in time. So actually, I missed out on the opportunity to go there, and that was a big blow. That was one of the really big hits you get sometimes in life, where you need to get back up on the feet and move again. But it's always been annoying me since that time that I didn't try to work in the Middle East. I always found the region interesting. Here, I don't talk about football, actually, more like just culturally and historically, I found that region of the world quite interesting. So when Al Jazeera came, that part of me still wanted to kind of say I want to try to live and work in the Middle East. And the second part was that I just started up my own company and my own consultancy, and we just moved to Spain. Everything was set for us to stay there long term for me to work. Then Corona came, and as you can imagine, it's not easy to be a consultant during COVID.
Yeah.
So the timing was just perfect in the way that they contacted me just around COVID saying, would you do it now, sport director? They approached me 1 year as well. But now the timing was perfect, and then we decided to go there.
And now you're working with your own, on top of all your other projects, you have your own consultancy firm as an advisor and development. You're many different topics around the football industry. But one of the topics I noticed that you're quite passionate about is big data. Do you want to speak a little bit about that? And maybe some people don't actually know what big data is in football.
Yeah, I don't know if what I call it myself, but it definitely comes from my background as studying in university, where
Mm.
you probably know in universities that, at least the one I was in, that every time you were supposed to write an assignment, for example, then basically every phrase you write, the teacher or the professor would come in and say, how do you know this? How can you prove this? So either you need to find a theory behind it that kind of proves your point or supports your analysis, and that really learned me that kind of that double check basically everything you believe subjectively. And I think that kind of going there for 6 years has always, of course, also biased my way of working. That I know I work in a certain structure, I work with a certain kind of need a proof for what we are saying and what we're doing. So I kind of took that into football, and I remember it started when I was coaching the 13 team. And there was a player that annoyed me, as you know, as a coach. Sometimes some players, we are human beings, so there's some persons we like better than others. And there was a midfielder that really annoyed me. I was like saying to my assistant coach, "Oh, he's losing the ball all the time." Simple logic, like he's the worst of the midfielders, kind of in possession, blah blah. Then my assistant coach, he actually just stood with a pen and took notes, and again just basically calculated. Very simple early days. Calculated good and bad passes basically, and found out that he was nothing worse than the other two midfielders. So it was a bias. It was my personal bias, and that also learned me that be careful of what your eyes are seeing. Trust, of course, the eyes, but maybe sometimes just check if the objective also supports the subjective. And then at Brøndby, when I came there later on, I was in some way lucky that the club was in a big trouble financially, because a young guy like me that had all the time in the world, that were willing to work 7 days a week, uh, was giving maybe more responsibility than I was supposed to get. But that was a great learning for me. So basically, I was doing under 19 head coach. I was setting up some clinics for almost acting like an academy director. I was helping the recruitment department, scouting in Sweden and Norway. I was doing all the performance analysis for the first team on the opponent and performances. And at that time, data started to come into football, but because Brøndby was a stage where they were basically bankrupt at the time, we couldn't afford the softwares. So I was doing the tracking myself. I was basically counting duels myself. I was counting certain players' performances through a data kind of simple Excel arc that we designed ourselves. So that also really gave me an insight to why it can be used to benchmark your performances. And I think that kind of experience gave me the feeling that then later on we are spoiled that we can get all the data in the world, and we can get all the softwares we want, but it's not about that. It's how you use the software. It's I call it the conversion rate. So basically, how much reading a report, how much can you convert going into the pitch and actually change something? Because if that doesn't happen, then you're just wasting time. I've been at clubs where they read the report, 40 pages after each game, and then put it in the trash can,
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, it's good to know," but then it's just a waste of time. That there needs to be a conversion rate, saying, "Okay, if we acknowledge this, then let's go out and design a training drill that changes this behavior or whatever we are looking for." So it's something that's important for me to connect to the subjective view.
I've had this conversation a few times with data analytics specifically, and I think it's the really key summary point is if you find an issue or a problem that you visually see, in order to take that bias like you were speaking of out of it, you really just have to prove it with data. And now with all the data tracking platforms and software like some of the ones you're mentioning, it's easier than ever. And I think as we adapt slowly, we'll realize that it's more and more important in the day to day, especially with the fine details that can have major differences, whether it's a football match or just running a club in general. I think that's really important. But we'll get
Yeah.
into Right to Dream now. This is your one of your projects you're working on currently. For the listeners that don't know, what is Right to Dream? What is their mission, and how do you involve yourself in the project?
Yeah, so yeah, just to clarify, so I took a full-time job now as group head of football for Right to Dream, so that's the only thing I'm doing now. But Right to Dream is an organization that was founded almost 25 years ago by an English guy who's today my boss called Tom Vernon. And Tom was a scout for Manchester United in Africa, and he saw obviously young kids on the street basically that obviously couldn't go to United, but he saw the potential in them if they were giving the right platform. And that's kind of one of the big beliefs for Right to Dream is actually that we provide pathways for kids. Because if you take a kid today, let's take a 10-year-old kid in Sudan, if he wants to play football, if he has a dream to become a football player, his opportunities are basically 0.0 because of FIFA regulations. The first time he meets a good coach, a well-educated pro-licensed coach, and a pitch that has been designed and a top level is when he turns 18, meaning when he can move to Europe, for example. That's not a fair. That can't be fair to that kid. And in general, we believe that we create opportunities where others don't want to go, and that's a kind of a Right to Dream philosophy. Then, of course, we can always talk about the football part, but that's of course interesting. But actually, where we probably are mostly different as well from all other organizations with academies is that we provide educational pathways for all students. And the big thing for me, which makes me sleep well at night, even I have 3 kids, so I always sleep well. But what makes me really sleep well is the fact that we never, when we take a boy or girl in at 11, 12 years old, give them the whole 6-year educational pathway and the football development, we never kick out the kid during those 6 years. You know, many clubs, they take in 10 players as 13, 5 goes out at 14, 1 goes out at 15, 1 is kicked out at 17, because they purely look at the football development. Where we see it more widely, we call our kids student athletes, first of all, because that's what they are. We try to develop leadership, character building of kids. On top of course, we are experts in developing football players. So that's of course an important aspect, but it's not the only aspect of Right to Dream. So building on that, we obviously that academy grew big in based in Ghana. And then in 2016, there were so many good players coming through, so they needed another pipeline, another platform when the kids turned 18 and could move to other continents. So Right to Dream bought the Danish club FC Nordsjælland and started to combine the Danish academy feeding talents, the African academy feeding talents into the first team of FC Nordsjælland. And after some years, a very successful transition. And today you now see players from these generations, Mohamed Kudus playing in West Ham, Simon Adengra playing for Brighton, Matthias Jensen playing for Brentford. So top level players that came through either Danish or the African academy merged into to FC Nordsjælland. And then recently we added to the group. So now we have an academy in Egypt as well. We opened here in October. We want to replicate the model in Egypt where there's a lot of potential, but not so many opportunities. And then we just bought the franchise in May for San Diego. We will join MLS in 2025 season, and we will open a residential academy for boys and girls in San Diego with a pipeline to Mexico as well. So another, I would say, area with a lot of potential, but maybe not so many opportunities. So we try to give pathways to kids, and we try to go into areas where others either don't dare to go or don't want to go.
We're gonna get a little bit more into some of the new platforms that you guys have started, like with San Diego as a club. But first, I really liked how you mentioned a student athlete over just a player. It's almost similar in a sense, like as you were talking, I was thinking it's almost similar to a college athlete in the US, where your education is a really big focus as long as you were with as an athlete, your sports career as well. Where I think that's different compared to the European sides where you're in an academy and it's really you become a pro player at 15, 16, and you don't really the education isn't as much of a focus. Do you want to speak a little bit more on kind of the educational side of Right to Dream and how that's a big factor for you guys?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you can start from the top. This is what I like about, in particular, working in this organization. Even I like to work for all the clubs organization I work for, but here there is a different. We are aligned from top to bottom, and for the owners and for the board, I would almost say, of course, football is our expertise. That's what we're really good. We're good at developing people and developing players, but I also know from the board's point of view that everyone needs an education. Otherwise they don't want to be in this project. This is the main thing for our current owners, Mansour Group, the Egyptian family that bought Right to Dream 2 years ago. The same when we built up academy in Egypt, their home. The education part is significantly important for them, just as the football. And speaking of the US, I think, if I remember correct, we have had over the last years something around 65 graduates from American colleges. So that's another pathway. So when all our players, they come into the academy, a little bit different depending on if you're in Denmark or you're in Egypt or in Ghana, but around 11, 12 years old. When they turn 16, we kind of sit with them and make a direction in their life. Are you going to be a professional player? Is that realistic? Is that your ambition? Or are you going to be a student athlete? Is that the pathway? So everyone has a pathway. That's the point. We don't want anyone to fall out of the cliff. We want everyone to have a pathway, and we are just as proud when we see someone becoming a doctor in the USA as we are of watching Mohamed Kudus score 2 times for West Ham last week. So it's a combination of both that kind of motivates us and inspire us. And from a personal point of view, I could say I've always been motivated by working where I've been on different levels, of course, and different pillars. But if you see, for example, going to Ghana, watching the village around where our academy is based, where really, really simple life, really compared to Denmark, primitive life is there. It's a quite amazing feeling that if I do my job a little bit better, can I help one more kid, basically? I mean, it's not that literally, especially not in my position.
But it is in a sense.
But it gives me, at least it gives me that feeling that I need to do my job a little bit better because I want to help more kids, basically creating a pathway. And then I'm a football geek, but actually that part for me is just as important being in this project.
So you mentioned FC Nordsjælland was the first addition to the group to kind of make that pathway from Africa to Europe. I actually had the chance to visit Nordsjælland when I was in Denmark, and I could really see the impact in the way the club structure is built. It's completely different to many others that I got to visit while I was there. But the newest addition is San Diego, and they're starting, I believe, in 2025. What is the kind of lead up to 2025? What are the main key focuses? I know you had the first academy sign or the first signing for the club with the young goalkeeper, if you want to speak on that in a little bit. But yeah, what are some of the first key things? I know you're focusing on the performance center and the training ground, but also some of the signings. Do you want to get into some of the first sort of key events that you've had so far?
Yeah, so San Diego, of course, I would say 1 year ago became a strategic decision from the ownership of the board saying, what do we need to grow from here? Because the thing is, when we open in Egypt now, we have Denmark. We are growing as well in West Africa. Now, I didn't mention Ghana, but we're also heavily involved in Ivory Coast, for example. So suddenly, you could argue that there can be an internal, we call it bottleneck, that we actually produce, it sounds a positive problem, but too many good players.
Yeah.
And then we're back to that everyone should have a pathway. So we kind of said, well, we probably need to add one more club to suddenly build 2 first teams instead of just having FC Nordsjælland. So that was kind of the strategic decision. Then we, of course, we looked around the world saying, where does it make sense? What's the best place? And US was picked for several reasons, I would say. Of course, the connection to our student athletes, that we have so many kids already in the States, which means that we are known. If you go to, I guarantee you, if you go to any university coach and you say Right to Dream, they know exactly who the students are, because we are giving hopefully good kids, but also good players to that system. Secondly, the World Cup is coming to the US in 2026 in Mexico. San Diego is actually, if you analyze where most top players are produced, is actually a talent hub in USA. And so far, the players just being picked up by other MLS teams, if they even pick them up. Some, of course, also just missed the opportunity because there's nothing. Then you have the pay to play model. So we're gonna disrupt that as well, saying it's not gonna cost you anything to come into our academy. So what kind of players can we pick up where the mom couldn't afford the kid to play, for example? So there's many areas where this is a typical Right to Dream project. In some way, you can argue we go into an area where we disrupt the market, and then again, MLS is growing as a league. The level is getting better and better. They start to sell players to Europe over the last windows. The branding of the league is heavily now. Messi came into the league last year. So all of these, if you add all of these together, there's a lot of pros. I probably, as many years working and advisor and sport director, that the fact that you cannot get relegated is we can discuss if you like it or not. That's a subjective feeling, but it's strategically it's a huge advantage, because I've been in many clubs where the biggest danger was 1st of July, everyone have 0 points again, and you are constantly in relegation. You every 1st of July you are in relegation danger because everyone has 0 points. So that factor, of course, does also that we can think very long term, that we want to build up another Right to Dream club with young players performing, and hopefully either taking San Diego, both taking San Diego to the top of MLS, but also selling players to the top clubs around the world.
I think because the focus of the group is so key on talent and bringing up player development and young players, I think that relegation factor is huge, because if you're constantly, the fear of relegation is a thing, then talent development becomes useless, because if you're coming down to those last games, you want your senior players in. Where in the MLS now, if you're a struggling team not heading towards the playoffs, you a lot of the time see them bringing up the academy players, giving them experience and time on the ball, which long term is key for a project like yours.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at Denmark, for example, the Danish league, which has a few years ago made a structural change where now we have 12 teams, and after 22 games you split up the league, so top 6 and bottom 6, and then 10 games you play about relegation or championship in those two groups. But interesting part for me was to speak to my colleagues, first of all, when this happened in the clubs, but also myself working as an advisor in 2018-19 in one of the clubs, that I think logically you assume that this is better for young players because the top teams get more. They basically get 4 games against each other per year. That is better for the development, of course, to play top games. And also, if you look at the teams, everyone constantly has something to play for, because either you're going up or you're going down. But the interesting part is that when I spoke to the clubs, and the same for the club that I was advisor for, they didn't dare to play young players because of the structure. Because first they said, "Oh, we need to go into top 6." Then when they managed to squeeze into top 6, then I said, "Well, okay, now we play the young players." So, no, now we can get into Europe. So I said, I just have to ask the question here: when is we supposed to play the young players then? Because you didn't want to play them the first 22 games, and you also don't want to play them the last 10. So actually, the structure maybe is a misunderstood tool in terms of talent development. And there, of course, you have a big advantage if you dare in MLS to think long term and build up your club in the right way.
San Diego will be the first MLS team to have a girls' pathway as well, a female pathway. And I think that's key. Like you said, you're disrupting the industry. That is one of the first big disruptions. Can you speak on that? And I also want you to speak on the academy itself. So the plans have been released for the fields and the performance center. I want to hear what is going to attract these type of players to this academy versus any other MLS academy in the US.
Yeah, you're right about the girls, but that's more of a global strategy, I would say. So of course it also affects San Diego, but back to the ownership, it's very important part for the owners to have a girls and strategy as well. Because if you go to West Africa, Right to Dream became the first residential girls academy in Africa. Because and the same in Egypt. I know for the owners being Egyptian, it's important to have a pathway for girls as well, either professional or becoming student athletes. Because in these areas, maybe girls are still struggling to a certain extent to get the chance and the same level as the boys. So that's just another factor that's very Right to Dream way of thinking. For the performance center, I mean, we would probably argue that if you take on my little bit arrogant hat, I would say that we know what good looks like. We have a track record that shows that we know how to develop players. We know what it takes to develop a football player if we go into the more hardcore football stuff. And therefore, we, of course, know how to design an environment. But we also know that the environment and the culture can be actually more important than the buildings. So it's also important for us that we have a very big thing about psychological safety, for example, in our environments, that we embrace the open debate, the challenge each other, not just among players, but also among staff. And nobody can feel attacked. People should feel happy that you're being challenged because we are constantly trying to develop someone and while we are developing something. So nothing is personal. We always try to play down the ego. Also, when we hire coaches or sporting leaders for our clubs and academies, we look a lot at the ego. We call it low ego CV, that you cannot be a person. Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say it's difficult to be a person that feels the need to be acknowledged a lot and be praised a lot. Then I would say Right to Dream can actually be a difficult environment for you because we praise the kids or we praise the project. We rarely praise the leaders. So you kind of have to find your own, be happy with your own self-esteem and just be proud of that you're providing pathways for kids or helping some kids getting an opportunity that they wouldn't get. So San Diego will be hopefully similar, but of course, being on Native American land is also a special feeling for the first time in American sports history. And in general, the cooperation with the Saguan tribe and all that also makes us proud that that's just a perfect match to Right to Dream as well.
You mentioned some of the challenges you've had throughout your career, whether it was the injuries when you were playing or Fleming just being straight up and saying your potential is probably better used elsewhere other than playing. What were some of those key challenges throughout, whether it was your playing career or even your working career now, that you really you were able to break through them and it helped you improve as a person, not only professionally but also in your personal life?
Yeah, moving abroad probably was the first one that is a game changer for most people, I would say, especially because to begin with, I moved alone. I had a girlfriend that the girlfriend from Denmark that came along, and we created a really strong partnership because you also you stick together more when you're just two out. But I moved to a continent at the time in China that I'd never been to Asia before. I basically landed in an airport with two suitcases in a country that I'd never been in, and that is a very, very wild feeling in some way.
Yeah.
It's a little bit terrifying feeling to a certain extent. You're really alone, and that's what you found out. I think probably my luck in that perspective is that I like to be alone. Actually, I'm a quite introverted guy that likes my own company. I don't mind sometimes to close the door and being alone. So that's probably helped me because you are sometimes really lonely. People say there's lonely on the top. That's kind of an expression, at least in Danish. And that's true because I remember also then in the beginning, for example, in China, maybe I was a coach in Shanghai SIPG to begin with. Then you're more like you have colleagues, you go out with them, you mingle, you find your own network. But then suddenly I became the technical director, and in some way I was above them in the hierarchy, and that changes the dynamics. So suddenly I had to sit with another table. I had another seat in the bus, not because I wanted to, but because the environment or the culture kind of demands that kind of hierarchy. And suddenly I'm very alone. I sit alone in my office with all the decisions basically. Then of course you have as a foreigner also working in UAE or other countries. I think what people don't realize is that you are in some way under a constant pressure because you are a foreigner. Their assumption is that we pay you probably extra than we could pay a local. So you need to prove that to me constantly. Basically, you need to add value, if not daily, then constantly as often as possible. And that of course is a pressure on you as a person. I think luckily that I either I'm born with it or I developed it, a lot of grit, and that's probably one of my biggest skills that I'm stubborn towards my own development or what I believe in. So it's difficult to push me around, and you need that sometimes when you are abroad because you will be affected by external, first of all, noise. People want you fired. Or I remember one time in the UAE where I was watching a game, and obviously I can't understand the language. I didn't speak Arabic, and then after the game, I go to the kitchen, and then my son he shouts, "Daddy, Daddy, you're on TV!" And I go in, I see a picture of my team, and I even I didn't understand Arabic. I knew what it was about. it was that this guy should leave now. So it's that kind of pressure you need to cope with. You need to learn to maybe stay away from social media if that's what you if you can't handle it. Then I always advise other people, say just shut down your social media activities if you can't handle it. Or people writing when I lost the game, and I'll just see that you get 200 messages that says FUCK out of my club, and take the head coach with you, by the way, when you leave, and don't let the door waiting for you. And this, that's I think you have to accept that part of the industry if you want to be in it, or shut down your social medias if you sit. If it goes to your head, then you will fail, because then you start to hesitate in your decisions. You start to don't believe in your work because someone told you that it's wrong to buy that player. Where I think, as I said, I'm lucky that I'm quite stubborn and have grit, which means that I'm quite certain on what I do. And of course, I listen to good arguments and advice, but I don't listen to the noise, and I cut off the external pressure as much as possible. But this is the big challenge when you move out of your comfort zone. But it's also where the big development is. So it's a paradox that you don't like it, but it's also a big part of. I spent 11 years abroad, and I felt development wise for myself like I've been out for 25 years.
Very good. We were speaking on the project Right to Dream Now, and sort of your role in it. What does an actual day in the life look like currently?
Oh, that is a good question, because I had a day the other day where it was interesting if you looked at my program, because I was physically traveling with the FC Nordsjælland first team to an away game in Europe. So came into the bus at Right to Dream Park going towards the airport. I think we played in Slovakia. I think it was that game. And during the bus trip from the club to the airport, I had a call with the Egyptian sporting leaders about a position that we needed to fill out. And obviously, as a group, sitting in the group role, we help the clubs and academies. We run some processes for them to ensure the quality and help them to hire the right people, for example. And then going into the flight, I had a meeting in the flight with one of the FCN employees, because you could use the time there. It was a 2-hour flight. Landed in the airport, and then in the airport, from the airport to the hotel, I had a meeting with Ghana, also about a role that we are about to help them acquire a sporting position for. And then we came to the hotel, and then we had a meeting about our new loan strategy that we have developed with FC Nordsjælland leaders. Then we went to the training to see the pre-match training in the stadium, went back to the hotel, and then the evening I had an interview that was set up some time ago about similar to I speak to you. So you can imagine that there's no really a normal day, because obviously that day didn't replicate the next day. so it's a very diverse. I often say that I actually have a lot of freedom in the job I have, but having very limited free time. So and I enjoy that. I enjoy that combination.
Yeah, it's a busy schedule, but I'm sure if that was replicated every day, it would eventually fall apart. So it's good to have a balance. One of the next questions here I really like to ask each guest. There's always listeners or someone interested in these interviews that might be looking at your position now, or even as we've spoken through your career and the organizations you've worked with, and go, that's something I potentially want to pursue, and that might be a passion of mine. Do you have advice for someone that wants to kind of follow that pathway?
Yeah, I get these approaches, to be honest, a lot from young aspiring people, and it's always positive when they reach out, not because it's to me, but because they are curious. And I always say to them, do everything, expect nothing. That was one of my strategies, was to I never asked for any salary. I never negotiated any contracts. I just signed the first two, three, four contracts I had in clubs, just to get in. The
Hmm.
point is you need to get in. And then my strategy was always to make myself impossible for them to lose. So do such a big work, and make the quality so high that when your low contract expires, and you're kind of saying, well, I probably will move on here, they will come to you and say,
Hmm.
listen, we really want to extend your contract. And I think that's what I've been privileged, is that I've always been asked to extend my contract. And the times I left club, I changed club, I was actually headhunted for the clubs. And I'm not saying that because I'm better than others, but I think the strategy worked, especially my early years when I didn't ask for a lot, neither financially or logistically. I just accepted whatever they had for me. If it was at the beginning a bus card or something like that, then that's fine. Then I go from there. And then again, you have to. I would advise everyone to go out of your comfort zone. So don't stay in your own area. Don't stay where you're born. It doesn't need to be abroad necessarily, but at least go. If you're in the States, go to the West if you're born in the East, and so on. Because it really will develop you as a person. That's where you really find out who you are, how you handle pressure, how you deal with people. So that's probably an important part as well.
I think one of the key things you touched on previously, and I can totally agree with the travel that I've done, is not only on the football side, but also culturally. I think seeing new cultures and meeting people, everyone, you might have a neighbor next door to you that is from a completely different background, and the way you approach them and speak with them, your brain's constantly learning, even if you don't realize. And so I think the key is really to stretch that and expand your mind into all those different kind of cultures and experiences. One of the
Sorry,
Mm,
have an open mindset. You're absolutely right.
mm,
But then it's of course important to have an open mindset, because, for example, I was also criticized uh, by moving to a country like UAE, because, for example, in the Scandinavian side where I'm from, it's not necessarily seen as a country of
mm.
modernity, which by the way you can argue that it's not, of course. But my point was always that, yeah, if you study cultural, um, yeah, if you study how cultures meet, and if you go back to the people that travel around the world to Columbus and all those guys, the point is you need to go there. You can't sit at home and point the fingers. You need to go there and learn and find out. Then you will probably find out that there's a lot you don't like.
Mm.
That's fine too. It's not like I go to China or UAE or where around I was, that I'm thinking, oh, everything is great here. No, but I learned it by being there and understanding them. I have a much bigger dimension that the world is a very complex place, and it takes an open mindset to understand people, not a fixed mindset of sitting at home pointing fingers, saying why they believe in Islami there, or these kind of things. So I'm not turning religion. I'm not pro Islam after I lived in the UAE, but I believe that I understand much deeper why it means so much for the people there, and what benefits it can also give to a society. Not that we can replicate it in Denmark. That's of course not possible. But I hope that I have opened my mind to trying to understand the world a little bit better.
I think with media nowadays, especially we know everything that's going on around the world. So it's very easy to form an opinion about something we truly don't know about. And like you said, unless you're in person and fully understand the opinions around the subject and truly what's going on, then especially me, I try to stay away from forming anything because I truly don't know what it is like. So I can totally agree with that. As we're heading to the end of 2023, do you have any personal goals for 2024? Something that you're looking to work towards?
Yeah, I don't like the word goals because I'm not motivated by goals myself. That never really gave me anything. But what I always did since 2003 is I call it directions. So I kind of wrote down in December what my directions should be like in the next year. And then I had also back in 2003, that's when I started working with these things 20 years ago. I wrote, this was when I was working with a sports psychiatrist, trying to develop my mindset. And I remember one of the tasks was describe your dream day in 10 years. And he was like saying, what we are good at, human beings, and we're good at thinking, that's not realistic or that's not going to happen. We said, try to be free in your mind. The funny thing is that when I wrote it, and I remember reading it, you were laughing. You're thinking, good one, but not going to happen, kind of. But actually, looking back at it now, I actually achieved a lot of these. I would say maybe 80% of it is actually achieved because my belief is in some way it's been in my mindset that I'm working towards this. Not like very, like I said, I don't like goals like you need to do 4 presentations a year or you need to do go to the gym 2 times a week. That doesn't help me as a person. It helps other archetypes. That's important to say. Other archetypes need these kind of specific goals, but I need more of I'm more of a loner in that way. I'm a free soul. I need a little bit of freedom in the frame, but I need a frame still saying what's my direction. For example, going abroad or going to the UE was for me still deliberately in terms of it was direction that I choose to then say, okay, if I want to go to the UE, then I spend the next 3 holidays I have going to the UE to meet people there, for example. That was kind of how I instead of talking, then I walked the talk, saying, okay, I want to move to England, but then I travel to 6 English clubs next year just to gain my network, So I think you need some kind of action plan to your, if you like, goals in my own word, direction. But for next year, to be honest, we're still settling in Denmark. We just moved back this year after 11 years abroad. And speaking of what we just discussed, it's actually interesting that there's a book also about this, a Danish girl that wrote about this, that we believe it's more difficult to move abroad, as we just talked about, but actually it's even more difficult to move home because you changed a lot, but the society often changed at a much slower tempo, and therefore there can certainly be a mismatch. I'm not saying that I'm not happy to live here, but it's definitely still in a settling phase for us to come back. And remember, both our kids are born abroad and used to live abroad, and there can also be climate things. For example, that my boy sometimes asks, "Where's the sun?" So you are in Denmark now, son. But it's definitely in transition. So I still think we have a lot of focus on getting the kids up to speed, also with the language. They're used to speaking more English than Danish. And then for myself, it's more related to the project that we really need to get San Diego FC working in 24. That's a huge year to build up a full football club with management team, technical team, staffing, club, players, etc. So it's a big one.
I like the wording of direction over goals. I think that is a different. It changes your mindset on how you look into things.
For someone.
Yeah, for some people that's great. And I'll change the wording of the next question because the next question I always like to ask is, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, personally or career wise as well? But I think you kind of answered that, but you want to touch on it a little bit. You really want to focus on your family unit, being home, and because you've had the experience of constantly traveling and being out. But touch on just where do you think you'll be in 10 years time?
10 years, that's of course a longer perspective, but I actually would say even 10 years, I think I'm right here in this little office I have at home, because one of the reasons we moved home was also around the kids' development. That we saw some kids living abroad. That I remember we saw one Danish family where living in China, for example, where the average stay for an expat is 2-3 years. This is normal. But that family, for whatever reason, stayed there for many years. But what happened was, of course, that the boy basically lost his best friend 4 times. And that's just not good for any development of a boy, because then you start to maybe hide your emotions, or you start not to trust people, you start not to engage with new people because you constantly get cut off after 2-3 years. So that and then in general, like, I was just thinking about what I want to offer my kids, because now my kids are everything that is above any selfish decision when you have kids. So we just agreed that this was the best for them to settle, take the school period, the 10 years, 9 years in school in Denmark, in one place with one environment, in one city, with the same group of friends and network around them. So I would say almost guarantee you that I'm not moving in the next 10 years. But then I also know that I've said that before, but that was before I had kids. Then we moved around a lot. I think we moved 10 times in the last 12 years. So
Wow.
that's obviously, I think that's what we found out when we bought the house here in Denmark, that this was our 10th move in 12 years. So of course that's not very sustainable with the family.
We'll get into the last quick fire questions here, just to learn a little bit more about you. What was your favorite club? I know it gets difficult as you get older and you work in the football industry, because there's a constant, like, do you support one club or are you working all together? But do you have one club that's truly at your heart?
No, the boring answer is that, and there's actually the honest answer, that you, like you, I think you are articulating it a little bit, that you, in some way, you lose the emotions. For example, I also like to watch football muted. I mean, that gives me the time to analyze the game. I don't want to hear what the fans are shouting, or our games in FC Nordsjælland, I watch inside box, because it gives a more quiet view on the game. Therefore, you lose the emotions. But as a kid growing up in Denmark, we only had one channel, and they showed one game a week in English football, local time, 4 p.m. And that was often Liverpool they showed, because they had Jan Mulby, the Danish player. So I was definitely a Liverpool fan growing up. But I have to say, I forgot it over the years.
Do you have a favorite quote or saying that you live by? I know you've mentioned a few throughout the interview, but do you have one that you really aspire to?
Yeah, there's a few, but I would say also related to Right to Dream. It's always been, also before I joined, but learning by doing. That back to the traveling, or the whatever you want to achieve, that you have to do it. You can of course support it by reading or studying or whatever you mean, but also as a coach, we see coaching as a profession. So it's not something you can actually study. You need to do it again and again and again for a hell of a lot of hours before you can actually be an expert in coaching. So yeah, learning by doing.
And you're back home in Denmark now. Do you have just a top recommendation for whether it's a city or a place to eat or something to visit? Is there a top recommendation for you?
Yeah, I'm still new here.
Yeah, that's it.
No, but seriously, I was in Copenhagen not so long time ago. But I used to live there for 10 years when I was younger. But I saw it's an interesting one. I would actually say, because we have a house in south of Spain where we spend a lot of time, so I could probably recommend something down there. There's a very nice restaurant in. So we have a house between Malaga and Marbella in south of Spain, called Benalmádena. And in that little village, Benalmádena Pueblo, so if you are in Marbella and Malaga, it's not too far away. It's called La Machica. It's a very nice restaurant. So I know many people go there for holidays, so they should try La Machica.
All right, perfect. And are you a person that likes to read? I know we get kind of a full mixed scale of, some people are really into reading, some are like me, where we pick up a book every few months and read a few pages. If you are into reading, what is your favorite book or something that you look towards?
No, I love to read, to be honest. Since I have kids, it's more difficult with the time. So now it's more audio books in the car and so on. But yeah, I did write a book many years ago about archetypes and motivation, and that was related to me and the researcher in motivation. We wrote that book on basis of reading Andre Agassi's book Open. So that book has always meant a lot to me because it kind of gives us the idea and the reflection to write a book about archetypes and motivation in sports. So I read that many times. Andrew Agassi's book, Open.
And do you have a favorite hobby or something? I know many of us with a passion for football, it really is our hobby, and so our lives kind of revolve around it. But do you have something? Sometimes it's the working, hanging out with the family, or doing something different to just break football for a little bit and have a break and relax.
No, it's very family. I
Mm.
spend every minute I can when I'm out with the kids, basically. So we have three boys here. That's of course fantastic. Like you said, also sometimes if you come home and you had a challenge, or when more days when I was closer to the coaching team, you had a disappointing result or disappointing performances. It's in some way relief to go home to a kid that has zero clue of what happened,
Mm.
and he don't care at all, and he's just happy, and he just show you the last drawing or something they did. It's a nice balance in life, I would say, on top of working a lot of hours.
And the last one here for you: if you could sit down with one person, dead or alive, for a meal, who would it be and why?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I could definitely find some provocative types in the history of politics that I would like to just understand, like Adolf Hitler, for example. It would be
Mm.
interesting just to understand him. I'm back to a little bit back to the book I wrote about archetypes. I really like to understand his actual motivation. If you could be on that, but related to football, I mean the biggest, most important person in football development for me is Johan Cruyff. For me, there's been no one bigger than him in terms of being a player with that influence he had as a player and influence as a coach. That combination, I don't think anyone has changed the game so much on both on and off the pitch. So he's always been a massive inspiration for me.
Mads, I really appreciate you coming on. This was a really good time, not only for me, but I'm sure the listeners enjoyed as well. Do you have anything you want to shout out, or anything that you would like to kind of drive the audience towards? And then if not, we'll wrap things up just after.
I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll speak soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.